Commissioner Bigelow joining us?
He is virtual, yes.
Okay. Oh, perfect. Okay. All right. It is 6 o'clock on the dot. I am calling the meeting to order for the January 19th Redevelopment Commission meeting. If staff would please take a roll call.
Chair Clausen,
Present.
Vice Chair Kendall,
Present.
Commissioner Bigelow,
Present.
Commissioner Meehan.
Present.
Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Amanda. At this time, members of the public may comment on matters not on the agenda. The Commission's response is limited to responding to criticism, asking staff to review a matter commented upon, or asking that a matter be put on a future agenda. Are there any communications from citizens at this time?
Mr. Chairman, we have one request to speak from Doralice Machado Liddell.
It's a nice mic. And thank you for allowing me to speak. So I just wanted to say, I know there's a study session. However, I know people will not be able to speak, but I'd like to just have a few thoughts. One, regarding the actual presentation on the sale. The residents of Lacey Track, like I said before, were notified the day of the meeting of the last meeting. And now we're coming to listen again to, I guess, the culmination. I'm not really sure, maybe an update. But what I will tell you is that the residents were not notified but the day of the meeting. And the Paseo is going through a residential area. I understand that it's connectivity. However, connectivity can be done in different ways. Ash Street is a very narrow street. Veterans Park is a park. And I know they'll tell you and they'll say that the redevelopment plan is a plan, and that's why they have the Paseo going through certain areas. But I will tell you, the redevelopment plan, according to the town, is just guidelines. Because as we'll see in the 9.1 plus acres, that isn't part of the redevelopment plan, yet that was allowed. So I say that there has to be some flexibility in determining where a Paseo will go through, whether there's going to be an overpass in a neighborhood, an underpass which is gone, or redirecting it on Gilbert Road. We think about the railroad. Oh, we can't do that. Well, I will tell you, widening a railroad has been done throughout the town of Gilbert. 3 lanes, 2 lanes. So I think that yes, that has to be looked at. In addition to that, if safety is a concern of the children, then on Elliott Road, they have a crossing on Elliott Road. That would have been a perfect place for an overpass if they were concerned about the children. The children have been attending school in Gilbert for 100 years in my neighborhood. They were going by the water tower. That was one school. In addition to that, there was one across on Elliott, which is still there. So I think that we need to look at the whole picture. And I think when we're looking at the residential area, I caution being scrutinized by surveys, because I think that where you live, that a survey should not dictate what's going to go in your neighborhood. Because if that was the case, we would be doing that throughout Gilbert. So I just ask a little caution. And then I ask also that within this, whatever's presented tonight, because I don't really know what it is, that it's really looked at, because Ash Street, there's no parking, really. And taking that away, and I'll say one more thing, if I may, regarding the redevelopment plan, because we talk about that a lot. It changes through design guidelines. It changes constantly. Substantial change needs to go back to the people. That needs to go back. However, slight changes, we keep on doing it, chipping away and chipping away. That makes it a substantial change. And I say to you, if we are going to continue down the path and always change things like the redevelopment plan, the general plan, and things like that, because in the general plan, Veterans Park is a park. So I just want you to just be aware and that citizens are aware, and I was not prepared to speak, but I thank you for your time, and I just hope that you will consider that. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any additional communications from citizens? Good. At this point in time, we now move into the administrative item number 1, consider approval of minutes for the regular meeting held on December 15th, 2021. Are there any edits the commission wishes to make?
Not at this time.
Do I have a motion for the Redevelopment Commission regular meeting and study session minutes for December 15th, 2021?
I motion to approve the minutes from December 15th, 2021.
Do I have a second?
I second.
Excellent. Now I will take a roll call vote. Commissioner Bigelow, how do you vote on the approval of the regular meeting held on December 15th?
I approve.
Commissioner Meehan
Approve.
and Commissioner Kendall.
Approve.
Thank you. We will convene the regular meeting at,
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
excuse me, we also need your vote.
and I approve the minutes. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will convene the regular meeting at 6:07 and enter into the study session. Tonight, we will be hearing a study session on the Paseo, DR 2160. If the consultant would please come forward for presentation.
Is there a way to maybe do page view? Yeah, it's only showing a portion of the page. I just want to make sure. Full screen might work. Okay. Thanks a lot. I think I need to speak into this. I'm sorry. My name is Chad Atterbury. I'm a landscape architect and principal with Dig Studio. We are the prime of a full team of consultants that are working on the 15% design for the Paseo. And I just want to sort of preface this. I think the statements earlier were very timely because right now, part of this update purpose is to sort of, while we're in the process, let this commission know where we're at within the process. And so this wouldn't be the sort of the final review of a final design. We want to make sure that the scope of the project and the schedule are really clear. So as you can see, those are some of the first items that I wanted to kind of get to before we get into some of the conceptual work that's been done. So real quick, I just wanted to look at sort of an overview here. I'm sure everyone's familiar with the Heritage District in general, and the boundaries of this project really go all the way from Elliott Road in the south to Juniper Avenue in the north. And the purpose of this is to really create a safe passageway for pedestrians and bicyclists through the Heritage District. However, as you can see within this graphic, we really understand that it's not one size fits all the way through the district. And so, as you'll be able to see with some of the concepts here, each of these segments, the southern Paseo segment in the neighborhood, the crossings at the railroad, and the core area sort of in the more commercial areas of the Heritage District, the existing development where we're calling North Alley, but essentially it's near the Heritage Marketplace, and the development that's going in north of the Canal. Those are all different segments to us in terms of how this Paseo might actually be developed. But with the idea of some thread of continuity and design, we're looking at this kind of holistically, but also each of the solutions is different for each of these areas. The schedule we're under right now, as was mentioned, we did a few different public outreaches. One was back in June and July. There was actually sort of about a 6-week period, 3 weeks of notification, an actual virtual meeting, and then a 3-week window for responses in that. That was actually expanded a little bit over the summer period before we sort of gathered all that information and went into some conceptual development. The conceptual development went all the way into sort of the holiday season, essentially, and we had an open house in early December. And right now we're, again, taking a window for responses after that open house. So while we get comments from the town staff as well as the public from that process, we're incorporating that in what will be the final design. But we anticipate having sort of a preferred concept developed into about a 15% level for cost estimation and review at the end of February. So that's sort of where we're targeting this development, and that's why through a Parks Board public meeting last night, as well as this meeting, we're giving updates in the process before we get to that kind of final step. Let's see here. Quicker. Work for me? Okay. So some of the interface that we've had beyond just some of those individual public outreach elements include we've had a few meetings or essentially got to review some of the developing plans for the Heritage North development. And part of that was coordination for how the Paseo can continue through that development and where this southern parts of this the Paseo need to connect to that development. So really trying to maximize the connectivity and continuity of this. So there aren't breaks or sort of unneeded jogs within this pedestrian corridor. We've also had outreach to individual stakeholders, specifically around the Heritage Marketplace and some other development in some outreach to look at options that we're developing in those areas, but also do a little research in terms of the potential new development that might go in to the areas around the core area of the Paseo, and we'll have some graphics to look at a little bit earlier to make that a little bit clearer. But we've also had quite a bit of input from residents and including outreach to the local neighborhoods and mailers and things like that. We've been at the farmers market to kind of give out QR codes to some of the information. The information's been posted on the town's website as well. One of the things that we thought was really sort of critical was when the invitation started going out through social media, et cetera. We posted everything that was going to be presented in the meetings about 3 weeks before. to give a few weeks for people to potentially review that, to try to increase awareness and the information that was available, so the feedback would be a little bit more timely when we did have those public outreach meetings. So I think we've gotten quite a bit of feedback. There was a really great response to the initial outreach, for instance, in terms of the responses we got. We got over 1,100 total responses to those initial digital outreach methods, just beyond what happened actually in the actual meeting. So we've all taken that into account as we've kind of gone through the design process. And so here's a couple of the highlights of those responses in terms of not just the survey responses, but individual comments that were sort of posted to us. And another thing I wanted to sort of touch on is beyond a pedestrian and bicycle route or routes for pedestrian sort of priority, if you would call it that, through some of these core areas, what we're also doing is linking quite a few public spaces. So beyond just making public space within the Paseo, we look at the importance of Veterans Park, the importance of the existing Water Tower Plaza, spaces around Heritage Marketplace, connection to the trail on the Western Power Line corridor. All of these, including new spaces in the potential North Anchor development, that Heritage North development, which areas like the central space where they're designed for the Paseo linkage would connect to. So it's really linking quite a few public spaces. This is also why quite a few events could be potentially coordinated and other sort of opportunities for public interaction. So beyond just the pedestrian corridor, it really does serve another purpose. So to get into the current concepts, I'm going to go through these kind of quickly. But what we started with was sort of a framework development for this core area where new development might actually sort of be associated with the parameters of the Paseo. Part of this was to really define the limit of work that the Paseo will be a part of, but it was also to look at opportunities that the Paseo could offer and how to maximize the opportunities for both public interaction, events, and sort of this outdoor pedestrian thoroughfare, but also how that actually could maximize the development opportunities. Where we ended up with was sort of what you see here on what's called the final framework graphic, is focusing the living room plaza space, which is a sort of a future planned event space, with the redevelopment of the Water Tower Plaza, and really sort of keeping the Water Tower Plaza as its own space, as that iconic space in the Heritage District, but also sort of maximizing that open space with some additional space that's part of the Paseo corridor in the core area, and focusing events in that area. This allows us to create sort of a more continual development area all along that western side of the planned Paseo, and that architectural edge will really sort of help define and activate this Paseo core. So from there, we developed several sort of patterning exercises. We have two different options here. One's called Heritage Crossing, and you kind of see within this core area some of the the plaza spaces and event spaces associated with that, as well as sort of some softscape spaces, areas for water collection, areas for seating and shade, and sort of that daily activity can be defined, as well as some of the larger events and commercial uses. So one of the, there we go. One of the key things here is shade, and so one of the big differences between the two concepts that you'll see is some different strategies in terms of how to treat softscape, how to develop shade with tree canopies versus structural shade. In the Heritage Crossing, we have these focused more on sort of the event nodes and the gathering spaces, with the rest of the spaces being primarily tree shade or building shade, planned development and awnings and walkways along those. You see this sort of, in both concepts actually, you'll see sort of this storefront promenade sort of defined for a walkway, and in a way kept separate with sort of that tree lighting and furnishing avenue along it. So even though you'll have these areas for fairs, festivals, dining areas, pop-up play, food trucks, and things to happen, these pedestrian ways along the Paseo will always be sort of kept open and defined. Here's sort of a max condition layout of, different things like tents and seating and food trucks and et cetera. Not that all of this would be maxed out at any given time, but these are just areas that we've tried to create as flexible spaces throughout. We look at the shade as opportunity for solar collection, water collection, as you saw from the other visual, but also opportunities to create really neat urban features with art and color. You see this event space here, the living room plaza, and that's really meant to be the kind of the focus of some of the more active and larger events potentially. So the Heritage Crossing concept kind of gives way to this other plan, which we called the District Cut. And this one has a little bit different influences in some of the geometries and patterns, but really you see the difference in the shade approach, number one, in terms of the amount of potential structural canopy as a strategy or shade canopy, and then also a little bit more regimented areas of softscape and sort of tree groves. And on the ground plane, that gives way to, although very shady and a lot of coverage, it also gives way to a lot of plaza-type spaces, which really does maximize the event capacity and sort of the amount of different flex spaces where temporary art installations, pop-up play, dining areas, and all those kind of things could happen. And you see within this, the promenade, on both, we would have access for loading and unloading emergency vehicles and those kind of things, but the promenade here is a more defined space potentially for pedestrians. For most of the time, it's a kind of a pedestrian-only corridor in this core area, but also can be activated, as you see here, with those event layouts. And this is kind of a view of what it would be like for a farmer's market or something to sort of potentially come into this space as well, arts fairs and different types of festivals and those kind of things. And so that core area is obviously the highest activated area, but it also will be kind of the generator for the materiality and sort of the patterning of some of these other more pedestrian-focused corridors where we want to create that connectivity and that continuity. But unlike a lot of those images you just saw, we're not looking to potentially really activate them with a lot of events and things like that. It's more about just being able to connect to that space and through that space. So in this, what we're calling the North Alley area, one key connection that we're making is potentially trying to eliminate some potentially grading conflicts, vehicular travel conflicts, looking at different opportunities to relocate some of the facilities there, like some of the trash facilities and things, where we can limit the amount of vehicular conflicts with this pedestrian crossing, trying to enhance it, widen it, and connect all the way up to the Western Power Line Trail, and as well as the development to the north. You kind of see a visual there. And also opportunities to sort of open up that opening that exists currently, but even looking at ways to include art, environmental graphics, and adaptive reuse opportunities in that area as well. Looking to the south and how we connect to that core area, obviously one of the key segments is the crossing of the railroad. One thing that we want to be really clear about in terms of this area, things that happen, is we are looking at an overpass as a part of this 15% design. But in any solution here, we really do need to look at potentially bringing people as an at-grade crossing at Gilbert Road. So what we want to do is sort of evaluate the potential for that overpass. But as you'll see with this blue line here, we're also looking at what's the simplest and most cohesive way to include the at-grade crossing at Gilbert Road with this Paseo corridor. One thing that this diagram alludes to as well is the potential for the bike lane actually to be co-located with the pedestrian way along Ash, but as you see, with the new Ash alignment that may be planned, even though it's not part of the Paseo project per se, we're trying to coordinate with what that future plan may allow, and the bike corridor may actually be moved along the new ash alignment from this location all the way north to Juniper. And so within that core area that we talked about being really the pedestrian focus and having a lot of sort of multi-use possibilities, we are giving sort of a designated bike lane route that can remove some of those conflicts for bikes out of that area to the north. Moving kind of quick here. Here's you see the existing condition, and we definitely have a really tight condition. And so we're looking at different ways. This graphic shows one of them in terms of being able to kind of expand what is the current pedestrian sidewalk to allow for a separate, distinct and marked bike lane as well. And that would connect back through to Ash Street. The other connection that we referred to, the overpass option, it kind of has two sides to it. One of them is trying to connect to Ash and to the Paseo, but in a way that is very park-like. And so the spiral landing here basically takes a very simple, kind of efficient truss crossing across the railroad, but lands it in a way that is very compact. So a couple options here that it gives you. It gives us an option to take bicyclists or pedestrians and have them actually go to the west or to the south from the neighborhood in multiple directions. But it also lands us in a way that leaves all of the existing trees and program that's in the park in place. And we're also able to grade up and actually have some of this landing be sort of at grade, so removing some of the tall retaining walls and things, and actually grade up some of the turf park areas to make it sort of more park-like, and potentially even plant more trees around this landing. While on the north side, in that core Paseo area, that living room plaza area, some of the new development and some of the active areas, you'd see that same piece of infrastructure look very different in more of an urban design sort of solution. Now, from that point, again, as you can see in that earlier diagram, it's essentially just pathways, either at Gilbert Road, moving over toward Ash, or along Ash Street to this southern part of Ash Street going down to Elliott. And we went through several different sort of iterations of what was possible here, looking at the infrastructure and the utilities. And one thing that we realized is we need to keep the driveways and alley access and a lot of the different elements like that always open and available. We want to keep on-street parking available on the east side of the road especially, and within the 2 blocks near the residential areas. And then we also wanted to maintain tree coverage. So what we looked at doing is, and even though we show them here in the plan, we looked at the possibility of undergrounding the electrical lines and moving the trees out in between the on-street parking, sort of clearly defining where on-street parking is available, but also creating a rhythm of trees and shade all the way along. This would give us the space available to actually expand that sidewalk a little bit and just make the walkway a little safer and a little nicer. And then we're looking at that Sharrow design, as you see here, for the abilities for bikes to have a marked route as well. So I went through that really fast. I hope I was on time. But our next steps, as I mentioned, are to gain the feedback we have here and these other opportunities we've had to share this update, and take that into this final design process where we consolidate some of these ideas into one plan. That plan will have a cost estimate put to it so that all of that information can be used by the town for the future planning for this project. And I will open it up from there.
Thank you. As this is a study session, it does not require a vote. However, this is the time for you all as commissioners to provide feedback for the project and ask questions of staff. Commissioner Bigelow, did you have any thoughts or comments?
No, not at this time. I feel like it is more in depth from some of the other ones we've had as far as passing through buildings and whatnot. And it's a lot of good information. If I have anything, I'll speak up at the end, but I think for now I'm good.
Thank you. Commissioner Meehan?
I have a couple questions for you. So I might have gotten two of the sections confused. So I may be asking a question that you answered in your presentation, so I'm sorry. But I heard that in one section where there's the opportunity for pop-up play and dining, it could be activated for emergency use. And then I also heard trying to limit vehicular conflicts like trash and waste. Were those two separate areas, or was that the same piece?
Two separate areas, and I'll clarify that first using this graphic here on the screen. In the core area, and within that diagram, I know I went really quick, but essentially the parameters are from Vaughn Street south to Page, and then from the next kind of half block south to where the new Ash Street alignment will essentially circle back around and will sort of bracket this before you even get to the railroad alignment. So from that railroad crossing to Vaughn is the core area. The intent there is to make this a pedestrian sort of priority zone, meaning the vehicular access would be prohibited through here, but for loading of events, emergency access, specific events that needed vehicular access, like food trucks or other kinds of things like that. Either design and sort of this final design that will sort of consolidate will have vehicular access to this area. Obviously, any new development, the buildings and things would need all kinds of fire and emergency access around them as well. And so the Paseo would be part of that as well. But I think the idea is that daily vehicular traffic would not be sort of on this core Paseo area. Going to the south in the crossing, we would be looking for something like a flush, meaning a raised tabletop crossing, so that the plaza area on the south and the north of Page would be a level crossing area, and would also narrow, similar actually to the way it does now, with the sort of the bump outs that we have that happen right after the on-street parking, sort of as you walk past the Hale Theater, for instance, and then on-street parking ends with a little bit of a bump out, and that crosswalk is very narrow. As it stands right now, if you go out there on a daily basis, or especially when there's an event there, like some of the arts fair that were happening last weekend and the farmers market, Page has a very different feel from Vaughn. And the stopping movement and the narrow nature of it and the way pedestrians meander along there. So this is not actually a huge change. It's actually just sort of emphasizing the connectivity between sort of the Water Tower Plaza area and that southern area and this block to the north. However, Vaughn does not have a stopping movement. We are not recommending that we sort of change the flow of traffic on that street. So we're sort of capping that area at Vaughn, so that crossing would be sort of a typical crossing. So we're looking at ways to, potentially demarcate that and make it very clear and safe in terms of the way pedestrians cross Vaughn at that location, with sort of better alignment that it currently has. But we are wanting that to be sort of a specific area. So as you move across Vaughn to the north, you go through what we were calling the North Alley area, and that was the area that I was mentioning in terms of potentially limiting some of the vehicular conflicts. And what I meant by that is there's quite a bit of traffic, not just from visitors, but also from deliveries and service vehicles and all those kinds of things through this area, trash pickup and the other kinds of things that you normally have. So we're looking at ways of consolidating those services, potentially putting time limits on them or having different routes of access for them, so that not only would we kind of widen and potentially flatten out this pedestrian area, so maybe we eliminate some of the ramp movements or make some of the directions of travel in and out of the parking garage a little clearer. But by moving some of that traffic, it makes that free-flowing connection to the power line trail a little bit safer and easier.
Thank you. I have another question. You had mentioned how the new Ash Street alignment, you're trying to coordinate and align the Paseo plans with that. Is there a way that those two could run off track and not be able to continue to coordinate with the time and the design? I like the idea of the collaboration, but I don't know what I'm asking exactly, but how are you doing that collaboration? How are you committed to continue that?
Well, I'll again, it's a limit in it in the scope that it shows, but I'll use this diagram just to speak to. So the new ash alignment obviously is primarily about a new route for vehicles to sort of take some of the pressure off of Gilbert Road, but also allow people a quick way sort of in and out of the district parking areas, where people go to park and then sort of access all the different businesses and things in the Heritage District area. So essentially that being developed also makes this connection from the south for a bike lane. So the timing of when that happens also allows for that bike lane to be more specifically developed as a bike lane. I don't know that it necessarily matters when it happens, because the need to sort of receive that bike lane won't be there until some of this new development is there, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm saying that very clearly, but essentially the connectivity of a defined bike lane and the potentially increase of traffic because of people recognizing that as a sort of a clear and easy route to take from a bicyclist standpoint off of Gilbert Road will also sort of come online as these sort of other avenues and things are developed. But it is a separate project from ours, so and I believe it's potentially at the same sort of level in terms of at the initial design and study stage. So there's time potentially to have those be coordinated in terms of when you are bringing a certain flow of pedestrians or bicyclists to an area, and how those can be potentially metered between the two corridors, if sort of makes sense. There's also the idea that even though this is an entire connected Paseo, that the town will be sort of part in the design and development of it, but potentially the implementation may not be all done by the town. And so obviously, as I mentioned, with the north development, part of that may be completed by others as well. So there will be times when the entire route may not be completed all at once.
Thank you. And one more question. In one of the graphics, you were showing opportunities, and you mentioned considering relocating electrical underground, which just who pays for that?
So essentially, this is a beautification project. There's oftentimes in coordination with utility companies that there can actually be a partnership in that, and sometimes I know in certain instances, SRP, for instance, actually does partner with municipalities in this, because there is sort of an opportunity to, potentially renovate the lines, and upgrade some of the lines that are there and things if they were aging. These are actually sort of smaller distribution lines in terms of the amount of power and sort of the size of the lines. Some larger power lines, like the ones that go down like sort of the Western Power Line corridor, those are much more expensive and much more involved in what's actually needed in terms of infrastructure underground. So it's one of the things we're evaluating. There are pedestrian walkways that have poles in them. It's not unheard of, but again, it would just be advantageous in terms of gaining more space for the pedestrians to at least consider that option. And as I mentioned, the design for this will have a cost estimate that's sort of part of all the proposals and designs at the end will be have a cost estimate delivered. So the town will have a chance to sort of, evaluate the cost benefits of that in terms of providing that extra room for pedestrians.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kendall?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a few questions in regards to future buildings. I know there was an RFP out for Gilbert and Elliott. Not quite sure how you tied that in.
So I will show this section just to kind of speak to that. So essentially, an expanded walkway design and the ability to have a really defined bike lane as well as on-street parking was sort of part of the Paseo development along that neighborhood part of Ash Street. And this would be essentially the design that would be connected to that part of the development. I think was being referred to as the south anchor. And so the segment of the Ash Street that would run along that development would essentially be looking at having on-street parking potentially and sort of an expanded. We actually hope that the development would offer more room for pedestrians than even we were hoping to get from the rest of the 2 blocks, north of that, where there's a really narrow 4-foot walkway. But at a minimum, we believe we'd be able to continue sort of this section as you kind of see here. We think obviously the wider sidewalk, the on-street parking would all kind of serve potentially what would be the ground level uses of that development. And so this is how we would sort of see how Ash Street and that development might sort of interact. The other thing that we would be hoping to implement would be some sort of wayfinding and sort of introduction of the Paseo. And that can be done obviously in the ground with different, sandblasting elements or, that kind of thing, but also signage and different kind of opportunities, which is another thing within the final 15% design that we will be locating different types of wayfinding and possible locations for that. So at that corner at Elliott, there might be an opportunity for some wayfinding and sort of an introduction of the Paseo to be coordinated with that development.
With the cross traffic on Page and Vaughn, and you made a statement that said those streets have a very distinct, different feel. I agree with you. How will that cross traffic be handled? Because right now you can still pull in to that street. Mm-hmm. You can't park there necessarily, but will there be barriers or pop-up type of things to people are creatures of habit?
Right. Yeah, and so essentially the 2 different designs, again, this is sort of one of the differences between the 2 designs. One of them has a very distinct promenade that has the ability for sort of end-to-end traffic, but we would be looking at barriers there like bollards or, whether it's pop-up or temporary bollards potentially, but also the use of sort of landscape and softscape areas, right? So there would be sort of strategically placed landscape areas and, signage and other sort of urban design elements potentially to sort of make that movement limited or prohibited, meaning when an event was placed, something could be removed and traffic could be allowed to go through. Emergency vehicles obviously have the ability to do that too in different ways, but to your point, somebody who just forgot where they were and were used to turning there and saw an opening wouldn't be able to turn there with a vehicle necessarily. I think one of the things that we're looking at is keeping the stopping movement at Page at the Ash alignment, even though it's now a pedestrian paseo. So you would actually have to stop before moving over and sort of yield to pedestrian traffic before moving over that crossing. So you'd still have a stopping movement at Page the way you do now. You just wouldn't ever be yielding to cars. You'd only be yielding to sort of pedestrian crossing.
What does that do to the ride share station that's on Page right there?
So the ride share station is actually just to the east, and essentially you would be able to pull in, and be picked up in the rideshare station, and then you'd be able to kind of flip around through either the new ash alignment or the sort of the roadway there that would sort of exit out of the district. So actually, again, in coordination with the sort of the network that's created there by the Ash Street being developed there to the west, that would actually be the sort of the quickest way to sort of exit that core area of the district to be picked up there. There's another pickup area along Vaughan that also could remain, and it's actually just to the so on Page it's just to the east of the Paseo. On Vaughan it's on the north side, just to the west of the Paseo, and both of those could be maintained.
Would this affect the driveway to enter from Vaughan, the driveway behind Zinberger, to go into the parking structure?
So the Heritage Marketplace parking area, that core area. So this is the sort of part of the pedestrian connection that we were referring to here, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, you're referring to the parking area that's just to the south on the graphic there, or the entrance that's just to the south, right behind.
So I'm not sure if the Paseo is running through behind the restaurants directly, in between the Hale Theater and the restaurants,
Nope.
or
Yep.
on the.
So this is actually you can kind of see if you turn around real quick, I'll show you. So the restaurants are here along Gilbert, and the entrance to this area is here. So right now there's a pedestrian walkway that goes along here that we're looking at expanding, and we're essentially looking at cleaning up some of this area to make it a little bit easier and clearer and safer, just so that not only is it sort of more generous, but also it's just visually more connected, and there's a sense of continuity there where you know that you're able to sort of connect through the Paseo to the trail system or the development to the north. And that connection is made by crossing Vaughan here. The alleyway behind the other restaurants that goes here is sort of in more alignment with the vehicular entrance to this parking area. So any modifications that are made here would want to keep the parking count in this Heritage Marketplace parking area the same and allow for that through traffic to circulate here.
But that would require people to walk in front of cars that are going to park in that.
So, right, and so what we're looking at doing, because that movement exists now for pedestrians to.
Not very well.
Exactly. So what we're trying to do is make it clearer where people walk, potentially remove some of the railings of the ramp movements to potentially fix some of the grading issues so that we can get rid of some of those barriers where people have to kind of walk in circuitous routes or kind of take a weird angle across a traffic movement, and eliminate some of those, so you're having less times where people are walking across drive lanes, and the amount of times where people are entering into those, you have more space for people to be viewed by the cars, and vice versa. Essentially, that's our goal there, is to identify some of those movements and make them clearer and easier for people.
Is there going to be a bridge over the canal? And the connection?
A bridge, I mean, we essentially want to take that walkway and continue it all the way and connect over the canal area. I don't know if I'd refer to it as a bridge, but because I think what our goal would be is to not touch it. There's a lot of coordination and issues involved with sort of renovating it or touching it in any way. But we would want to go over it in a way that sort of left it in place. In terms of the Paseo project, there may be other projects that look at planting shade along the Paseo that's on the south side of the northern development and things like that. But with this part of the Paseo, we're looking just to connect just to the north of it, where that development has a plan to sort of pick it up. So I don't know if we would be bridging it necessarily, but we would be creating a walkway connection over it that tries not to touch it, if that makes sense.
What's the height of a train?
And
does it vary?
I know the clearance that the railroad requires is a minimum of 23 and a half feet above the rail lines. So there are some very tall freight trains that move through here, and as long as you have that clearance, though, similar to the pedestrian bridge that was installed recently, our clearance would be similar to that. And again, our strategy would be to create sort of the most efficient, simple sort of truss movement that can span those long distances in a kind of a relatively cost-effective manner there. But it's really how those land in those spaces that we want to treat kind of in a special way, because they are two very different conditions to the north and south.
You mentioned the fluidity of the Paseo and walking through with art projects and food trucks and those types of things. Does that include the treescapes? Will they be potted and have the ability to be moved and be fluid, or will they be planted?
So we're looking at a few different options. That's actually one of the things that right now with the town we're sort of working at. On the town also has another project, sort of a tree and shade master plan that they're working on. We've had some coordination with that consultant in terms of the types of trees and also the planting methods. The way we actually take stormwater off of these spaces will be very important in terms of growing a canopy, because if you're relying on the canopy in this particular situation to provide the shade where structural shade would otherwise, you really do need sort of consistent, healthy growth in terms of that canopy. So, the way it's treated underground in the ones that are actually planted in the ground, to your point, is really important in terms of not treating it like normally like you would see on a streetscape with very limited sort of root zone area, the amount of porous paving and where that could be used to sort of increase the air and water exchange and those kind of things. So really doing things that optimize that root growth would be really important for what is placed in the ground. However, there are opportunities here to create that character, create those little rooms and things like that, where potted plants and different types of sort of movable things potentially could be implemented to create more character, more green space, more biomass, within this area, and still have it be flexible for events. There's an element of sort of maintenance and upkeep that comes with that. That's even a little bit extra from even what you normally see, which is pretty intense with trees. But there may be ways, again, to partner with potential development opportunities here on these pads to actually help implement that. And so as the design furthers within this core area where partnerships with these development opportunities and created with these pads along this really highly active space that's sort of to their benefit as well, some of those types of things potentially could be negotiated with those tenants.
So then the maintenance would fall on the city or the town?
I think everything within the main corridor is sort of looked at the way the Water Tower Plaza is, for instance, in terms of park space. So, certainly some of this core area and the public space portions of it would be. And how that gets funded and implemented, though, could definitely be partnered with some of these development opportunities here.
Thank you.
Anybody else? I have a couple questions. Option 1 and option 2, are there any physical size differences between the two options on the width of option 1 and option 2?
No.
Okay.
It's essentially within this framework study, I'll hop back to that. Sorry for hopping around so much. But within this framework study, we're showing, 3 options here, but essentially there was probably 8 or 9 options with B's and C's of each. And one of the things we were looking at, besides sort of the big programmatic moves of where sort of the event space would go and things like that, was also just the dimensions of it. And we looked at dozens and dozens of precedents for spaces like this, and looked at sort of the architectural context, the flexibility of the spaces, and also sort of wanting to make this feel comfortable on a daily basis, and what would actually be able to achieve that and still achieve some of the, the flexibility for sort of those larger public events. Essentially, all of that was sort of tested within this, and we ended up with a framework that not only allowed sort of some optimization there within this width of the Paseo core area, but also allowed us to have really marketable, developable pads with the kinds of mix of uses that we think would really be successful here. But to answer your question, both concepts use that framework, kind of to this diagram's point, which I blew past really fast earlier.
Perfect. Yeah, apples to apples. Good. You'd referenced a couple times this the budgetary that's going to be put together. Who's going to be in charge of putting the cost estimates
So we
together?
have a consultant on our team. I think it's all the way at the end here. So again, as I mentioned, we're the prime for a team that's working with the town. RLB is doing our cost modeling for us. They did some, Ryder Levitt Bucknell there, they did some early cost estimation on overpass and underpass options as well, specifically, kind of looking at those options and testing, again, sort of apples to apples, what a sort of a basic crossing in each type is relative to each other, as well as some different connection options to the north with, different levels of connectivity with an overpass and development, and grading implications of an underpass, and how that affects utilities and all those kind of things. So there was some early cost study on that specifically, but the first overall cost estimate for the pedestrian way from beginning to end will be done when we have the 15% design completed here, hopefully at the end of February.
Thank you. Yeah, I see this core area, finding that perfect balance of having it be inviting and the softscape, almost transforming you into just a very peaceful world, versus like option 2 having primarily hardscape, and elimination of a lot of the softscape, the grass, and all of that. Finding that balance, I think, is going to be important. Is there any plans from a cost standpoint? And you actually touched on it. These things do need to be maintained. Is there any plan? Does RLB have plans on putting a cost estimate on the ongoing maintenance comparison between the two options, so that we can see what potentially the impact has between option 1 and option 2 over 5 years?
So their estimate will be specifically for the implementation, the construction of these type of elements. But we are in discussions with the town on sort of weighing that as we develop the final plan here. Meaning, just to your point exactly, the balance between structural canopy versus tree canopies, the differences between them, the initial investment cost, but what the increased operation and maintenance may be. So that has led us, along with a lot of the feedback we got from the public, for instance, had a lot of positive sort of feedback about the Heritage Crossing option. And part of it had to do with some of the feel that you kind of mentioned, right? And so what we are looking at right now, as we consolidate this and take some of that public input in terms of sort of the overall character of that daily sort of walking sort of environment within this retail restaurant area and those kind of things, rather than, focusing sort of a lot of the feedback on like big events and things, it really was about that feel, both successful for the businesses, but also for people walking through this area. And so we're looking at a final design that actually has more of a balance, a little bit more of these softscape areas, a little bit more variation between the tree locations and some of those more intimate spaces with a lot of shade. But we're also looking at balancing some of the structural shade to allow some of these sort of open programmable spaces to have shade in a way that this particular concept kind of opens up more. So we're trying to implement more shade overall, but in a more balanced way, to where one has like more primarily structural shade versus tree canopy. It's going to be more balanced to try to sort of level that out.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, I mean it. You can see how this will contribute to the vibrance and the walkability of the Heritage District, and I think it's a great start. Any other questions before we move on?
I have a suggestion, maybe. I don't remember how long ago, but I remember we got some information or a packet regarding how much the town has made off of liquor licenses and taxing on food and just all that stuff. And it was pretty impressive just off of the businesses that have already been set up there in downtown. Maybe if we could get an updated list of that information, it would be helpful to kind of show, yeah, we're spending a lot of money on these areas and putting, utilities underground and building this all out and maintaining it, but kind of showing how much that really benefits our town by having these things set up to where people can go and spend money, how much it really actually helps our town rather than just costing us money. I think something like that would be very helpful for everyone to kind of see as well, if possible.
Commissioner Bigelow, this is Amanda Elliott, and I am glad to provide those numbers in the staff report this evening.
Oh, perfect. Awesome. Because, yeah, I think that just helps a lot with us just looking at the costs and everything and feeling good about, doing a project this big, because it is exciting. It is going to be a lot of money, but it's also really exciting. And that's all I have.
Excellent. Well, Chad, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
The time is now 7:01. We will now recess study session and reconvene in regular meeting. Staff, will you please do roll call to reconvene the regular meeting?
Chair Clausen,
Present.
Vice Chair Kendall,
Present.
Commissioner Bigelow,
Present.
Commissioner Meehan.
Present.
Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you. We now move on to the public hearing, which will be led by our vice chair, as I have to recuse myself for matters related to Heritage North.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will now open the public hearing for UP 20-06 Heritage North. Items will be heard at one public hearing, at which time anyone wishing to comment on a public hearing item may do so. Comments will be heard from those in support of or in opposition to an item. In order to comment on a public hearing item, you must fill out a public comment form indicating the item number on which you wish to be heard. After the public hearing, the Commission may act on all items not requiring additional staff, public, or Commission comment with a single vote. If staff would please come forward to provide a presentation of item Z-20-06 Heritage North Ground Floor Residential.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Is this on? Can you hear me okay? Okay. Just wanted to make sure. So this is, if it's okay with the Commission, I'd actually like to present both items together. I think it'll save a little bit of time so I don't have to explain things a couple of times.
It's okay with me.
All right, perfect. So we're going to talk again about the site at the southwest corner of Juniper and Gilbert Road that I have been before you a couple of times now. So excited to be here tonight about this next step in the process. This specifically relates to two of the use permit requests. Just as a little bit of background and a refresher, this is a 9.9 net acre site. We've been working on this for a number of years, since 2019, with that initial development and disposition agreement, which I'll touch on just very briefly tonight. And then in March of 2020, the applicant submitted those 5 applications that we've talked about in the past. The rezoning, which the Redevelopment Commission heard last month as a hearing item, the use permits that we're going to talk about tonight, the design review, which you will likely hear next month in February, and then that administrative use permit that we've talked about a number of times, but staff will review administratively. In terms of the process, as I mentioned, Redevelopment Commission did hear the rezoning and PAD request in December. That then went to our Planning Commission in early January and Town Council on January 8th. So that process is complete and it was successful. They did successfully receive approval from the Town Council on that item. So tonight we're here to talk about use permits. The Redevelopment Commission's role in that is to make a recommendation to our Planning Commission on these two specific use permits. If successful, we will be again before you next month to talk about the design review application. So tonight, the two items before the Redevelopment Commission are two use permits. The request is to make the findings of fact and approve UP 2006. This is for ground floor residential in the Heritage District. And then the second use permit is for UP 2008, and that's to allow a hotel in the HVC zoning district. What's important to note is the site plan accompanies both of these applications. So you'll notice that there are conditions in each of the use permits that tie the specific request to this site plan. So any future development would need to be in substantial conformance with this site plan that you see on the screen and that is part of your staff report. Building 1 would be limited to the ground floor residential. They could not propose ground floor residential in any of the other buildings. Similarly, the hotel would be limited to building 2, so the hotel could not relocate to another portion of the site or be located in one of the other buildings proposed on this site. Important to note that this site plan was memorialized also in that rezoning application, so in order to amend this site plan to change the reconfiguration, anything that isn't substantially in conformance with this would have to go back through a pretty onerous process, Redevelopment Commission, Planning Commission, and Town Council. So this ties it all together. The Land Development Code talks about uses requiring a use permit, and so I thought it would be helpful for the Redevelopment Commission to just touch on the purpose of a use permit and what we're really considering. So per the Land Development Code, these are uses that require special consideration so we can evaluate any possible impacts that it has to surrounding properties, make sure that it meets the intent and vision of our general plan or any other planning documents we have, such as the Heritage District Redevelopment Plan. So through that evaluation, there are 4 findings of fact that must be met in order to approve a conditional use permit. Generally speaking, they can't be detrimental to the health, safety, general welfare of people in the vicinity. It should conform to the purpose, intent, and policies of the general plan, the redevelopment plan as well. It should comply with our zoning code or any other state, local, federal regulations. And it shouldn't interfere with the enjoyment of nearby properties. So as we think about those findings that must be met, as we look at the ground floor residential, as a refresher, this is 288 units. There are about 52 ground floor residential units. One of the things that staff has worked closely with the applicant on is ensuring that interior to the project, where there will be a lot of activity with the commons, open space, and other uses within the site, that the ground floor uses in that area are active, pedestrian-friendly uses. So the applicant has proposed to provide their recreation facility, their leasing office, a coffee shop, kind of interior to the site. And then staff acknowledged that ground floor residential along Juniper and Ash probably makes a lot of sense in terms of the activity that those areas will see. And so staff does believe that the findings have been met on the ground floor residential. Moving on to the hotel. The hotel is proposed at 80,000 square feet with 100 rooms. This does comply with the development agreement. The development agreement required a 75,000 square foot building or 150 rooms. So this meets the minimum square footage requirement. It also complies with the Heritage District Redevelopment Plan. In that plan, there were some areas identified for some tourism or for some hospitality type uses, and that did fall within this site. So staff would recommend approval of both of these use permits tonight. There are conditions associated with both, as I mentioned, available in your staff report. But with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have tonight on either one of these applications, and our applicant is here tonight as well.
Commissioners, do you have any questions for staff? I have a question. You had mentioned ground floor on Ash and Juniper. Does it go 360 around the building?
The ground floor residential is, let me get back to the site plan here. Okay, so if you look at building 1, the residential building, there is ground floor residential along all of Juniper, along all of Ash Street. At the southeast corner, so kind of at the intersection of what is labeled as Park Lane and Center Street, that is proposed as a coffee shop. And then if you head north, so behind Building 3, just on the west side of Center Street, that's where the fitness center is. Along with the mail room, there's a bike area, a pet spa, leasing office. So all of those are kind of oriented interior to the site where we expect a lot of the pedestrian activity to be.
Commissioner Meehan?
Those services are only available to the residents of that structure, correct? It's not a gym I could go join.
Vice Chair and Commissioner Meehan, that is correct. The coffee shop would be open to people visiting the site, but the fitness center is for the residents' use.
Commissioner Bigelow?
As far as UP 20-06 and UP 20-08 in regards to doing residential on the bottom floor and, you know, having the windows be smaller than normal and the idea of having a hotel there, I don't really see any problems or have any questions with either of those two. So I'm good for now.
Thank you. Would the applicant like to speak at this time?
I'm a little reluctant to do so. Things are going well. Charles Humano for the record. We're excited to be here. You've been here before. We've talked about a lot of different things. I do want to make some preliminary comments before I move into the presentation. It's interesting, many of the slides that Gilbert presents says shaping a new tomorrow today. And I think that's really what's happening here. It's really exciting for us to be present, not just to hear about our case, we obviously care about that, but to hear about the Paseo and the longer term plans. And I think Dan and Amanda really deserve a lot of credit for having us talk about the things tonight that we're talking about. We really are shaping a new tomorrow, and we're doing it today. So we're excited to be here. It's exciting to hear about the presentation on the Paseo. I have a presentation planned. The great thing about working with Ashley is she's incredibly thorough. She too is a rule follower, and she's laid out the criteria pretty well. I don't want to repeat everything. We've spent a lot of time. I'm happy to spend more time on any of the things that you would like. I would say that while the gym is generally reserved for residents, we're always looking for new residents. So if you wanted to come in and use it as an opportunity to think about whether you'd like to be a Crescent resident, we'd certainly, I think, find a way. Is that right, Ken? Just get this presentation working. This is really about the use permits. I think that the goal of the use permits, though, is to make sure that what happens, and we can talk about the health, we can talk about the general plan, we can talk about the zoning, which we've been through recently, but all of the things really are designed to make sure that the goals of Gilbert and the goals of the various documents, including the zoning ordinance, are met. And I think, I don't know what happened there. I don't think that was me. That's okay. I appreciate it. We're not just trying to widen paseos. We're also trying to widen screens. That's good. No, it's good. Let me kind of go back. I think I will skip most of this and go to questions because Ashley has done such a great job at covering the points. But I guess I just want to add, in addition to everything she said, what we're trying to create is that. And doing that really, I think, articulates why, the hotel, obviously we have to do it. It's part of the development agreement. The multifamily has to be as part of the development agreement. You could argue that we don't have to put residential units on the ground floor. We've got 9 buildings here. Most of them are retail. I think only so much retail works. We've tried to be selective, not only about where we put them, about how we put them, what the buildings look like, what they feel like, what the areas around the buildings feel like. And as we went through that process, early on, we still had a Burger King on the corner. And I think the history here is relevant as to how we got where we are. We found out that we couldn't do what we wanted because the Burger King had a height restriction that they controlled on the rest of the property that made everything one story. And so at great expense, we purchased the Burger King. The Impossible Burgers may be 2 for $6. I have learned that that's not how they make their money. They apparently make their money by selling the Burger King later because they can buy a lot of Impossible Burgers for what occurred. But it wasn't impossible, and we spent a lot of time working with the town to come up with a plan that worked for everybody, that worked for us, but also that worked for the town. And ultimately, the hotel ended up moving into the corner that contained at least the Burger King, if not more. I could show you the pictures of the Burger King, but we all know what it looks like. It's not attractive, and we're trying to move on from that. And one of the things that happened by moving things around and putting the hotel on the corner where it wasn't originally planned is we had to move the amenities to the roof. It's a lot more expensive. I think it's going to be nice, but it's definitely a lot more expensive. And as a result of that, some of the things we would normally have had on the ground floor don't exist. They're on the roof. And so we tried to find a way. Ashley mentioned we worked with her quite a bit, which is true, to create other uses like the gym, coffee shop, which is available to others on the ground floor, but also not compete with our own retail. And so in a nutshell, that's kind of how we ended up where we are and why we're asking for the use permits. We think they make sense, particularly the hotel was part of the development agreement. We couldn't meet the development agreement without that use permit, but also in crafting the residential in a situation where we use the residents to really beef up the other retail, which I think is really good for the entire downtown. I also have my presentation from last week, so if you'd prefer, I can do a full 30, 45-minute presentation on things, but it seems not to be helpful. So if you have questions, I'd love to answer them and skip the rest of the presentation. If you want me to give the presentation, I will.
Commissioner Meehan, do you have any questions?
I took a lot of time last month asking a lot of questions, and just because of the cohesive nature of the whole design, I had to become comfortable with some of the future asks. So I've gone through a lot of my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bigelow, do you have any questions?
No, I don't at this time. Thank you, though.
I believe you went in and touched on it a little bit. If the ground level is not approved, what changes?
Tough question to answer. Obviously, we would try to find a way to deal with it, but I think what would happen is in order to technically meet the code, you'd end up with a less comfortable building. We'd have fewer units. We'd have more height. We'd have to go back and ask for additional height. And in the end, I think you would have a project that's out of balance. We would have to find something else to do with the ground floor. And I think that we have appropriately placed retail where it should be, in particular along Gilbert, along the Commons, in the office building. We have a lot of retail. It's a huge amount of retail for the downtown. We think it works. We think it works in good balance where it is, and we've worked with your professional staff to get to that point. This isn't anywhere near the first version of what came forward. There were several versions before Burger King and several versions after. I think at that point in time, we would probably have to revisit whether or not the hotel should be on the corner. That's something that's been important to some in the town, but ultimately, I think we would probably have to revisit that and move things around. And I think you would end up with a less urban, less comfortable space with potentially too much retail And to do that, we would probably take retail out of some of the other buildings. So, this is one of those occasions where we're not asking to do that, and I know you're not asking us to do it. It's a good question, but I think it would take the balance out of the project that we've spent 2 years creating. Could happen. It would just be a less pedestrian project.
Thank you. Now, staff, are there any members of the public in attendance who would wish to speak on item Z20-06?
Mr. Vice Chairman, we have no request to speak on Z2006.
Are there any additional questions for town staff? Commissioner Bigelow, Commissioner Meehan?
Thank you.
Thank you. I will now close the public hearing on item Z20-06, Heritage North, ground floor residential, and we'll look to the commission for discussion. Who would like to share their thoughts first?
I just want to clarify, where am I seeing these numbers? Z20-02, is that?
Commissioner Meehan, you are correct. I'm sorry, Vice Chairman. I have the zoning number listed in there, and it's actually UP 2006.
Thank you. Do I have to update that at all?
No, we just as you discuss this and make a motion, you will want to note UP 2006, and then for the next item, UP 2008.
Thank you. Commissioner Meehan?
Well, I don't like the idea of going any taller. So I think where the ground floor residential is located is optimal when you look at the site and the site plan. And I think if the answer is potentially coming back to ask for more height, I asked a million questions in the last meeting because of my reservation with height, so that would put me back on alert if that's the answer. So I'm comfortable with this for that reason. I would rather have ground floor residential than go taller.
Thank you. Commissioner Bigelow?
Yeah, I agree as well with that, and especially since it is tucked in that corner on Juniper, it's kind of a less congested area and less foot traffic. I think that is a really good compromise, and I think we do have a ton of retail and a ton of restaurant down here, and having more, multifamily people actually living in the district will definitely help keep those businesses alive and just keep the whole thing flowing and functioning and working. As far as the hotel goes, we really don't have any good hotels near here. I know for down the road on Higley, but those are in Mesa. I guess that's kind of Gilbert, that little section with the hospital. But having a hotel, getting rid of the Burger King and having a boutique hotel right there, I think is only going to make the overall appearance of entering into the district and that North Acre just so much more grand and special. And I feel like if the applicant was willing to, pay double or pay extra for that Burger King and, to get us a hotel there, I think that was a really great deal. And, I think it'll be really good.
Thank you, Commissioner Bigelow. I agree. Had some reservations about the multifamily residential, but I believe that it will be managed well. At least that's my hope. So at this point, I'd like to call the commissioners for a motion to approve UP 20-06 and UP 20-08.
Mr. Vice Chairman, As a matter of order for Robert's Rules of Order, our legal has asked that we do a motion on UP 2006 and then open a public hearing, allow for opportunities for public to speak, and then close the public hearing and then make a second motion.
I apologize.
No, thank you.
I motion to approve UP 20-06.
Do I have a second?
I second that motion to approve UP 20-06.
A motion was made by Commissioner Meehan and a second by Commissioner Bigelow. I will now take a roll call vote. Commissioner Meehan?
Approve.
Commissioner Bigelow?
Approve.
I also approve. The motion passes 3-0. We will now move on to a public hearing for UP 20-08 Heritage North Hotel. Ashley already walked us through. Commissioners, do you have any questions for staff in regards to UP 20-08? Commissioner Bigelow?
Nope, I'm good.
Applicant, would you like to speak? Staff, are there any members of the public in attendance that would wish to speak on item UP 20-08?
Mr. Chairman, we do not have a request to speak at this time.
Perfect. Commissioners, any questions for town staff in regards to UP 20-08? I will now close the public hearing on item UP 20-08 Heritage North Hotel and look for the commission to discuss. Would anyone like to share any additional thoughts? Okay. At this time, I will look for the commissioners to for a motion.
I move to approve UP 20-08.
Do I have a second?
I second UP 20-08 for approval.
A motion was made by Commissioner Meehan to approve and seconded by Commissioner Bigelow to approve UP 20-08. I'll now take a roll call vote. Commissioner Meehan?
Approve.
Commissioner Bigelow?
Approve.
I also approve. The motion passes 3-0. At this time, Chairman Clausen will return. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Kendall. All right. On Tuesday, January 11th, Council accepted the resignation of Commissioner Harmer. We want to thank Commissioner Harmer for his wisdom and feedback during the time that he served and are certainly sad to see him leave. Are there any communications from our council liaison, Councilmember Tilkey?
Good evening, Commissioners. Thanks for the opportunity to speak, and it's good to be here. I know I've missed the last meeting. Just a couple things. As Ashley mentioned, the rezoning and PAD for Heritage North was approved 7-0 by the council, and I just wanted to take a moment to thank you all for all of the hard work you did. Asking hard questions along the way makes this a better project, and it has changed quite a bit from the very beginning because of your work. Want to thank the staff, the applicant, and the public for being a part of this. This is a key cornerstone of our community, not just the Heritage District. Chad, he left. Wanted to thank him for his work on the Paseo. This is a project that's been going on for a very long time. I think as Chad mentioned, the council accepted the shade and streetscape master plan. So that was accepting the actual report. now the hard work begins, now that we've got all the background and different things. And so you'll be seeing that incorporated, I'm sure, as we move forward in other projects in the downtown area, but wanted to let you know that as well. And with that, that's my report.
Thank you, Councilmember Tilke. Do you have any updates, commissioners? Do you have any updates you would like to share? All right. Amanda, is there a report from staff?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I want to start with the request from Commissioner Bigelow. We do regularly measure what our return on investment is in the Heritage District. It's really important to understand, you know, as we continue to invest, what that return is. So first we look at what the return on is for every dollar we invest. And our most recent numbers say for every $1 publicly invested by the city in the Heritage District, we see $1.47 in return. What that looks like in sales tax, the Heritage District accounted for approximately 1% of the town's total sales tax collected in fiscal year 21 at approximately $1.2 million. And when you look at that growth over a 10-year period, that sales tax revenue generation has seen a 198% increase over the 10 years. So that just talks to how the development has encouraged additional people visiting our Heritage District and using it as the community living room as we intend per the redevelopment plan.
What was that total number again?
For the sales tax revenues, it was $1,253,746, and that is a 198% increase.
Thank you.
Right, and yeah, thank you. And that is not gross, that's just Gilbert's portion of the sales tax revenues. And then we also like to look at the value per acre. So how does the Heritage District relate to the buffer area? And so the estimate for full cash value in FY21 for 1 acre in the Heritage District was $1,559,562. When you look at that in comparison to the buffer area, so the area that surrounds the Heritage District, the Heritage District is actually surpassing the buffer area by a rate of $351,921 per acre. So that begins to speak to the overall return on investment that we're seeing in the Heritage District, and we're committed to keeping those numbers current on an annual basis. With my other updates, just wanted to note, for those who may be looking for a job in the Heritage District, Gypsy Cup Coffee, which is located at Heritage Marketplace, which is Vaughan Avenue west of Gilbert Road, is now hiring. So great opportunity there. And with the resignation of Commissioner Harmer, there will be a vacancy for those who may be interested in applying for the Redevelopment Commission. It is not open yet, but you can find that application when it is open under boards and commissions, board openings. Just a note that we've talked about Water Tower Plaza and the ongoing construction or maintenance there, and the water fountains and splash pad are now active. So we've gotten everything worked out with the county, and it's great to see that really critical space up and running, particularly as we come into our spring travel season. And then just a final note, Gilbert is completing improvements to sidewalks, ramps, and drainage components to bring the Lacey Track neighborhood, which is southwest portion of the Heritage District, as you saw in the Paseo meeting, or the Paseo study session. So we're bringing that into the ADA compliance. And construction started on January 3rd and is expected to be completed in spring of 2022. So those are my updates.
Excellent. Thank you, Amanda. With that, the time is 7:33 and meeting adjourned.